Hello, and welcome to Integrating Accommodations with Instruction. My name is Siobhan McManus. I'm the Fiddler's Technology Specialist.
And hi, my name is Lisa Lutz. I'm here with Siobhan today to provide you information regarding accommodations in the classroom.
Our learning intentions for today include define accommodations and modifications, identify types of accommodations, determine who is eligible for accommodations, select, use, and evaluate accommodations, and finally, integrate accommodations with instruction.
What the law tells us. In Florida, all students, including students with disabilities, have the opportunity to work toward grade level academic standards or access points as appropriate and graduate from high school with a standard diploma. Students may use accommodations during instruction and assessment. The goals for learning in school do not have to change because students use accommodations. Accommodations can help students with disabilities be able to meet the same requirements as students without disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, or Section 504, governs services provided for students with disabilities. Each eligible student will have an individual education plan or 504 plan that documents the services a student needs. Both laws, ESSA and IDEA, require students with disabilities to participate and make progress in the general education classroom. The laws include provisions for accommodations, for instructional activities, and statewide assessments. Students with a significant cognitive disability may work on access points and participate in the statewide standardized alternative assessment. Annual goals on an IEP must be aligned with the grade level standards.
Who is eligible for accommodations? Accommodations are important for students with disabilities. Students use accommodations to increase, maintain, or improve academic performance. The state of Florida has adopted rigorous educational standards known as Florida Standards and Next Generation Sunshine State Standards to ensure students become college, career, and life ready. Together, these standards define the core content of the general education curriculum. Accommodations assist in making grade level standards accessible to students with disabilities.
Any student with a disability who has been evaluated and determined to have a disability under IDEA or Section 504 may receive accommodations. The student's needs for accommodations are documented in their IEP or Section 504 plan. Accommodations are supports that students with disabilities need and are documented in their plan. Accommodations fit within the broader framework that support access and progress of all students in the general education curriculum and in all tiers of instruction within an MTSS framework.
Why provide accommodations? Students with disabilities may need accommodations to make progress in the general curriculum and to function in daily life. However, selecting the same accommodations for all students with a particular disability is not appropriate. Similarly, accommodations that are unnecessary can have a negative impact on a student's performance. The accommodation should be based on the learning and behavior characteristics of the student's needs that result from the disability.
Accommodation or modification. What's the difference? Accommodations are changes in how a student accesses information and demonstrates performance. In Florida, modifications are defined as changes in what a student is expected to learn and may include changes to content, requirements, and expected level of mastery. Changes that modify the requirements of the standard and lower expectations can limit academic progress of a student. The following are examples of changes that modify the requirements of a standard. Requiring a student to learn fewer objectives. Reducing the level of complexity of assignments and assessments. Accommodations should not reduce learning expectations. In Florida, accommodations are defined as to changes in how a student accesses information and demonstrates performance.
Accommodation or modification. A few examples. Accommodations could include read aloud test items and non-reading passages, providing extended time, extra breaks, prompting students to task, and verbal encouragement. Accommodations do not change the content, instructional level, or grade level for which the student is enrolled. Accommodations should be unique to the student and based on individual need. Accommodations must be data-driven and addressed at least on a yearly basis at the 504 or IEP meeting, whereas modifications, you can complete only part of the assignment, and based on the access points, a student may have a modified curriculum. Modifications adjust the instructional level and expectations and assessment information. Modifications are the changes in what a student is expected to learn, alters the content, and lowers the grade level, instructional level of the standards. When students participate on a modified curriculum using access points, the learning becomes more accessible and more academically appropriate for the student. It is important to remember that the only students that should receive modifications are students who are working on access points and taking the Florida Standards Alternative Assessment.
Attached under the Materials and Attachments section in e-learning, you will find a copy of the most recent version of the Accommodations Manual from the Florida Department of Education. The manual is also accessible using the QR reader you see on your screen. The next several slides, we will review parts of this manual and the 4 types of accommodations.
So what are the 4 types of accommodations? We will be talking about presentation, responding, setting, and scheduling. Matching learners with accommodations. As mentioned in the manual, if you look in Appendix B, Accommodations Quick Reference Guide, you will see that each area of accommodations is delineated by the page numbers. Accommodations are a key component of effective educational programs for students with disabilities. Many students with disabilities need only small changes in the way they are instructed and assessed to participate successfully in the general education classes. In this chapter, accommodations are organized into 4 categories. Presentation, how students receive information. Responding, how students show what they know. Setting, how the environment is made accessible for instruction and assessment. And finally, scheduling, how time demands and schedules may be adjusted. A general description of the types of accommodations is provided for each category along with examples. The examples do not represent all possible accommodations. Students with disabilities may need accommodations that are unique and novel and have been shown to help them learn and demonstrate competence. Such accommodations are to be provided for the student and documented in their IEP or Section 504 plan.
Presentation accommodations. Presentation accommodations make it possible for students to access information for instruction and assessment. Students with disabilities may require materials in specialized presentation formats if they are unable to see or read textbooks or hear the teacher. Students may need presentation supports to facilitate their ability to read, observe, and listen in the classroom. Additional information on presentation accommodations can be found in the manual beginning on page 48.
Response accommodations. Students typically respond to classroom tasks by speaking, writing, drawing, or other means of expression. Response accommodations may enable students to use different ways to complete assignments, tests, and activities. The students with disabilities unable to respond in standard ways may need to use alternate response modes. This may include students who have a sensory or language impairments, as well as students who have motor impairments that result in difficulty with handwriting or speaking. Additional information can be found in the manual beginning on page 53.
Setting accommodations. Setting accommodations involve changes in the location or conditions of the educational environment. Accommodations can address accessibility issues, behavior and attention, and organization of space and materials. Students who use accommodations that distract other students, such as a reader or a scribe, may also need setting accommodations. Additional information on setting accommodations can be found in the manual beginning on page 57.
Scheduling accommodations. Scheduling accommodations involve changes in how time is allocated, scheduled, and managed. Students may need scheduling accommodations to address issues related to effort, rate of performance, attention, or their own ability to manage time. Changes in the amount of time or the way time is organized for activities can be provided as an accommodation. Some students do better when not under pressure of a strict schedule. Others need more time because they read and process information more slowly. Students may also need extended time to use certain accommodations, such as assistive technology, braille, and dictation. Additional information can be found in the manual beginning on page 59.
When developing an IEP, the IEP team must determine how the student's disability affects their involvement and progress in the general education curricula. The IEP includes a description of the impact of a student's disability in present level statements and other appropriate sections. Accommodations can help students with disabilities meet the same requirements and standards as students without disabilities, and of course, increase their academic success.
Presentation accommodations. How will the students receive information? Presentation accommodations make it possible for students to access information for instruction and assessment. Students with disabilities may require materials in specialized presentation formats. In other words, formats that are accessible if they're unable to see or read textbooks or hear their teacher. Students may need presentation supports to facilitate their ability to read, observe, and listen in the classroom.
On your screen, you will see a bulleted list of some examples of presentation accommodations. Please refer to the presentation accommodations section in the manual for additional information. Response accommodations. Students typically respond to classroom tasks by speaking, writing, drawing, or other means of expression. Response accommodations may enable students to use different ways to complete assignments, tests, and activities.
Setting accommodations. Setting accommodations involve changes in the location or conditions of the educational environment. Accommodations can address accessibility issues, behavior and attention, and organization of space and materials. Students who use accommodations that distract other students, such as a reader or a scribe, may also need setting accommodations.
And finally, scheduling accommodations. How can we adjust the time demands and schedules in our classrooms? Scheduling accommodations involve changes in how students utilize time. Students may need scheduling accommodations to address issues related to effort, rate of performance, attention, and their own ability to monitor and manage time. And I don't know about you, Siobhan, but sometimes I think I could use a little scheduling accommodations myself.
Managing time, yes, ma'am. So let's talk about selecting, using, and evaluating accommodations. Here are some questions for teams to consider. What instructional assessment tasks are difficult for students to do independently? Are these difficulties documented in the student's individual plan? The planning team begins by identifying tasks the student has to perform independently in the general curriculum. Instructional and assessment activities involve many kinds of tasks. For example, tasks may involve reading to obtain information, writing answers to open-ended questions, solving math problems, following directions, working independently, and collaboration with a group. The student may have difficulty with specific tasks in academic, developmental, and functional areas. In Florida, these areas are described as domains that can be used to organize present level statements and annual goals in IEPs. The team uses current information about the student's achievement and ability to identify concerns with within these domains. The data may come from diagnostic or formative assessments, progress monitoring, and classroom work samples, as well as observational and anecdotal records. Once concerns are identified, the team focuses on specific tasks that are difficult for the student.
2. Next, the team will consider why these tasks are difficult for a student. They will look for barriers that may affect performance. Each task is considered separately. First, the team will determine what the task requires and what the student is expected to do. Then they will analyze the grade level standards along with the components of the task. Next, the team will review how the student currently performs by comparing the requirements of the task with what the student currently can do. The team will identify gaps that can be addressed by instruction and accommodations. The team will also determine if conditions in the learning environment are a support or a barrier to student performance. The student may have strengths that can be used to support effort and motivation. barriers may be present because the student has difficulty using standard classroom materials. The student may not be using accommodations effectively, or they may need new or different accommodations.
Number 3, what accommodations will allow the student to access information and demonstrate performance of the tasks? The team can identify several accommodations and should not feel restricted to a single strategy or a device. By considering multiple options, the team can select the most effective accommodation rather than the most popular. The team should make sure the accommodation matches the student's abilities and needs. The student will need to learn how and when to use the accommodation in a satisfactory time frame. After the planning team has considered a number of possible accommodations, they can help the student select the specific accommodation. The team can use the following criteria and questions to consider the potential impact of the accommodation. Is the accommodation necessary for the student to be able to perform the task? Does the accommodation help support independence? Can the student generalize the accommodation for similar tasks? And does the student feel the accommodation is helpful? Basically, are they willing to use the accommodation?
And finally, the team will need to evaluate the effectiveness of the accommodations listed on the IEP or Section 504 plan. The team will need to identify indicators such as task completion, accuracy, and overall productivity to reflect how effective the accommodation is. In addition, the team should measure the impact on student performance. Progress toward grade level standards can be measured using grades, progress monitoring, and other assessment data. If student performance is not improving, the team will need to reconvene to determine the need whether to continue, change, or remove an accommodation.
Who can provide accommodations? All teachers can implement and provide accommodations across all settings. ESE teachers should communicate with the general educators prior to the start of the school year and share copies of IEPs, including the listing of accommodations for each student. General education teachers should assume ownership of students with disabilities in their class. These children are part of the classroom community. ESE teachers should partner with the general education teachers to help implement IEP goals and accommodations. Ensuring students with disability receive accommodations is everyone's responsibility, and they are required as outlined in federal and state laws. It is unreasonable to require that a student have to request to use an accommodation that are in the plan to help support success in schools. So please be sure, if you have a student with accommodations, encourage them to use those accommodations until it becomes automatic.
Implementing accommodations. When planning for instruction, teachers think about what their students are expected to learn and the activities they will use in the classroom. Many teachers find it helpful to keep a simple list with names of students and their accommodations in their lesson plan books. Teachers may find that they have to take additional steps to make sure students with disabilities can use accommodations effectively. The student may need orientation and instruction on how to use a new accommodation. The student may also need to be reminded as to when to use an accommodation. The student will gain independence as they become more proficient and comfortable using accommodations.
Here is one example of a tracking sheet that can be used to keep track of and collect data for the types of accommodations students are using and the impact they have on daily classroom work and assessment. This form is simply a sample. A copy of it is attached under the Materials and Attachments tab for this course in e-learning.
It is a common misconception that accommodations create an unfair advantage for students with disabilities. In truth, the supports offered by accommodations allow students with disabilities to access the same instructional opportunities as students without disabilities, thereby leveling the playing field. When educators use accommodations appropriately, they provide equity. That is, they give each student what he or she needs to be successful in the classroom. By promoting equity, teachers can break down barriers that interfere with students' opportunities to access learning. With the best of intentions, sometimes educators strive to promote equality, giving every student precisely the same thing. However, by doing so, educators inadvertently limit the opportunities of students with disabilities. In other words, giving every student precisely the same does not ensure fairness or equal opportunity. To better understand the concept of equality versus equity, please take a minute and look at the image on your screen.
So as a follow-up to this training, we recommend that you also view Read and Write for Google Chrome, assisting students who struggle with reading and writing. This training will provide an overview of Read and Write for Google Chrome extension and how this extension can be used to provide some common accommodations, including oral presentation.
We also recommend that you view the bucket training, Equity Bucket, using Google Tools. This training will provide an overview of the Google platform and tools you currently are already using in your classroom, and highlight how these tools can be used specifically to support struggling learners and students with disabilities to help ensure greater access to the general education curriculum.
So we'd like to thank you for attending our training, and if you have any questions, you're free to contact myself, Siobhan McManus, or Lisa Lutz.
And in order to earn in-service points for viewing this recorded training today, please be sure to upload the reflection form located under the Materials and Attachments tab in e-learning by the end date listed for this course. Thank you.
Thank you.